Picture this for a moment. You've just discovered you're pregnant. But this isn't 2025, this is the year 1347. There are no pregnancy tests, no ultrasounds, no trained doctors. Instead, you have a midwife who believes your uterus can wander around your body if you don't keep it in place with foul-smelling herbs. You have a physician who's convinced your baby can be possessed by demons if you look at a black cat too long. And you have a 1 in 3 chance of dying in the next 9 months. Welcome to medieval pregnancy, where the phrase giving birth had a much more literal and terrifying meaning than you could ever imagine. Where every day of gestation was biological Russian roulette, and where women wrote their wills from the moment they confirmed their pregnancy, because they knew they were more likely to die than survive. Today we're diving into one of the most brutal aspects of medieval life, the 9 months of absolute terror that constituted pregnancy in an era where medicine was indistinguishable from witchcraft, where medical treatments were more dangerous than the diseases, and where childbirth literally meant risking your life in a game where the odds were brutally stacked against you. Prepare to discover why medieval women considered pregnancy not as a blessing, but as a potential death sentence that required spiritual preparation, not just physical. Because after this story, you'll never again take for granted the miracle of modern medicine. Let's start with something that will rock your world. In the medieval world, determining if you were pregnant was a process that involved examining your urine with methods that would make a modern laboratory shut down immediately for safety violations. And when I say examining, I'm not talking about sophisticated chemical analysis. I'm talking about procedures that included drinking your own urine, mixing it with wine, and observing if it attracted specific insects. The most popular method, documented in the medical treatise De Secretis Mulierum, required a woman to urinate in a clay pot, add honey and wine, and bury it for 9 days. If after digging it up, the mixture had developed small white moving worms, this confirmed pregnancy. If it developed red worms, it indicated the baby would be male. If it developed black worms, it meant the baby would be female, or that the mother would die during childbirth. But here's what will really make you sick. This method wasn't just medically useless, it was actively dangerous. Women who drank these fermented mixtures developed severe intestinal infections that weakened them precisely when they most needed to be strong. Medical records from the period are full of cases of women who died from poisoning during the first trimester, not from pregnancy complications, but from the methods used to confirm it. Another popular method involved inserting a clove of garlic into the vagina overnight. If the woman's breath smelled like garlic in the morning, this confirmed pregnancy, because they believed there was a direct channel between the uterus and mouth. What was really happening was that women were developing severe vaginal infections that compromised their immune systems just as pregnancy began. Medieval doctors also used a method called the uterine pulse test, where they violently pressed the woman's abdomen while she lay face down. If they detected internal movement, they declared pregnancy confirmed. In reality, this intense abdominal pressure caused spontaneous abortions in many cases, but doctors interpreted the subsequent absence of pregnancy symptoms as evidence that their initial diagnosis had been incorrect. Records from the Hospital of Santa Maria in Paris show that approximately 40% of women seeking pregnancy confirmation developed serious complications during the diagnostic process. Many arrived healthy and left with infections, hemorrhages, or abdominal trauma that seriously compromised their pregnancies. But if you survived the confirmation process, then the real terror began. 9 months of medical treatments designed to ensure a healthy pregnancy that were actually systematic torture disguised as medical care. Once pregnancy was confirmed, medieval women entered what doctors called gestational regimen, a treatment program that included regular bloodletting, violent purgatives, and dietary restrictions that basically guaranteed severe malnutrition during the most critical period of fetal development. Bloodletting was considered essential to balance the humors during pregnancy. Doctors believed pregnant women had excess hot blood that could cook the baby from within if not drained regularly. Pregnant women were bled every 2 weeks throughout pregnancy, losing approximately half a liter of blood in each session. Imagine the physical state of a woman who, while creating a human being inside her body, was being systematically drained of the blood she needed to maintain both her life and her baby's. Medical records describe women so anemic they couldn't walk, so weak they had to be carried to their bleeding sessions, so pale that doctors described them as living specters. But here's what will really break you. When women complained of extreme weakness due to the bloodletting, doctors interpreted this as evidence that they needed more bloodletting to eliminate the corruption causing the weakness. It was a cycle of medical torture, where symptoms caused by treatment were used as justification to intensify the treatment. Purgatives were equally brutal. Pregnant women were forced to take violent laxatives made from mercury, antimony, and toxic herbs to cleanse the intestines of impurities that might contaminate the baby. These purgatives caused diarrhea so severe that women became dangerously dehydrated, lost essential nutrients, and developed electrolyte imbalances that could cause seizures. The medical treatise Gynecia by Muschio recommended a specific purgative made from mercury, sulfur, and goat bile that should be taken monthly throughout pregnancy. Hospital records show that women who followed this regimen had spontaneous abortion rates of 70%, but doctors interpreted this as evidence that the purgative was eliminating defective fetuses and preventing monstrous births. Now, if you find these medieval medical revelations as disturbing as they are important for understanding how far we've come, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more historical truths that will make you value every advance in modern medicine. Dietary restrictions during medieval pregnancy were designed by men who obviously had never been pregnant and who had an understanding of nutrition that would make a modern elementary student impressed by their ignorance. Pregnant women were forbidden from eating practically everything that contained essential nutrients, under the theory that certain foods could mark the baby with undesirable characteristics. They were forbidden from eating red meat because it was believed it would make the baby violent. They couldn't eat fish because it might make the baby slippery and difficult to hold. Fruits were forbidden because they could make the baby too sweet and attract demons. Green vegetables were prohibited because they could make the baby be born with green skin. What remained in the approved diet for pregnant women was basically stale bread, water, and occasionally bone broth. This survival diet guaranteed severe malnutrition during pregnancy, critical anemia, and vitamin deficiencies that caused fetal deformities, premature births, and maternal death from extreme weakness. Records from the convent of St. Bridget in Sweden document that pregnant nuns, yes, it happened more than they officially admitted, who followed these dietary restrictions had an 80% maternal mortality rate. Those who survived childbirth often remained with permanent neurological damage due to severe malnutrition, but the restrictions didn't end with food. Pregnant women were forbidden from a list of activities so extensive that it basically turned them into prisoners in their own homes. They couldn't go out during lunar eclipses because it was believed it could make the baby be born blind. They couldn't see ugly animals like toads or pigs because it could make the baby inherit those characteristics. They couldn't attend funerals because the presence of death could contaminate the baby. They couldn't have sexual relations after the 3rd month because it was believed the male penis could hit the baby's head and cause mental retardation. They couldn't laugh too loudly because it could make the baby be born with frivolous character. They couldn't cry because salty tears could poison the amniotic fluid. These restrictions weren't just medically absurd, they were psychologically devastating. Pregnant women lived in constant terror that any action, thought, or experience could harm their babies. They developed what we would now recognize as severe obsessive-compulsive disorder, paranoia, and extreme depression. Now let's talk about something that will make everything above seem relatively humane: the medical treatments for pregnancy complications that were literally more dangerous than the complications themselves. When a woman developed what we now know as preeclampsia, high blood pressure during pregnancy, medieval doctors treated it with a combination of more bloodletting, application of leeches to the genitals, and ingestion of liquid mercury. Mercury, of course, is a neurotoxin that causes permanent brain damage in both mother and fetus, but medieval doctors considered it a universal purifier. For morning sickness, the standard treatment was the application of hot irons to the abdomen to burn the impurities causing the discomfort. This resulted in 3rd-degree burns that became severely infected, causing sepsis that killed both mother and baby. Records show that women who received this treatment had a 15% survival rate. When a pregnant woman developed fever, doctors submerged her in ice-cold water baths to cool the burning blood, followed immediately by boiling hot water baths to expel the disease through shock. This thermal shock treatment caused instant abortions in most cases and maternal death from cardiovascular shock in many others. For vaginal bleeding during pregnancy, the treatment was to insert rags soaked in hot vinegar and salt directly into the vagina. This caused internal chemical burn so severe that women were left with permanent damage to the birth canal, making future successful pregnancies impossible. Records from St. Bartholomew's Hospital in London show that women who received medical treatment for pregnancy complications had a 90% mortality rate, compared to a 60% mortality rate for women who received no medical treatment at all. In other words, seeking medical help during pregnancy tripled your chances of dying. But perhaps the most terrifying of all was the childbirth process itself, which was treated not as a medical event, but as a spiritual battle between good and evil that was literally fought within the woman's body. It was believed that labor pain was divine punishment for Eve's original sin, and that alleviating it in any way was interfering with God's will. Women were forbidden from screaming during labor because this could alert demons to the arrival of a new Christian soul. They had to give birth in complete silence, biting rags or leather to avoid making noise. Midwives had no medical training whatsoever. Their only qualification was being older women who had survived their own childbirths. Their techniques included violently pressing the woman's abdomen to expel the baby faster, inserting non-sterile instruments into the vagina to guide the baby to the exit, and performing what were essentially cesarean sections without anesthesia, using kitchen knives when labor became complicated. Records from Fontevraud Abbey document a birth where the midwife, frustrated by prolonged labor, decided to help by cutting the woman's abdomen with a butcher's knife while she was fully conscious. The woman survived the procedure but died 3 days later from infection. The baby was born alive but died hours later. The midwife was praised by the community for her brave medical innovation. If the baby presented in breech position, midwives attempted to turn it by inserting their hands into the uterus and physically manipulating the fetus. This caused massive uterine tears that resulted in hemorrhages that killed the mother in minutes. Records show that no woman survived an attempt at manual fetal correction. When labor was prolonged beyond expectations, midwives resorted to increasingly desperate methods. These included making the woman jump from heights to shake the baby out, administering hallucinogenic herbs to help her see the path to birth, and performing exorcisms to expel the demons that were holding the baby. The most popular midwife manual of the time, The Birth of Mankind, contained instructions for performing what was essentially torture if labor didn't progress normally. These instructions included using hot metal forceps to extract the baby in pieces if necessary, techniques to accelerate labor that involved inserting sharp objects into the uterus, and methods to save the baby that required literally dismembering the mother. Parish records show that in some medieval communities, up to 50% of women died during or immediately after childbirth. In years of epidemic or famine, this figure rose to 70%. To put this in perspective, maternal mortality rates in modern developed countries are approximately 0.02%. In the medieval world, giving birth was 2,500 times more dangerous than it is today. But here's the part that will really emotionally destroy you. Medieval women knew exactly what their odds were. It wasn't secret information. Every woman knew dozens of other women who had died during pregnancy or childbirth. It was so common that communities had specific rituals to prepare pregnant women for death. When a woman confirmed her pregnancy, she automatically wrote her will and made arrangements for the care of her existing children. She said goodbye to her family as if she were departing for a war from which she probably wouldn't return, because that's exactly what she was doing. Personal diaries of noble women from the period revealed devastating psychological terror. A French countess wrote, "I have confirmed my third pregnancy today. I have written my will, I have made my goodbyes, and I have begun preparing my children for the possibility of growing up without a mother. Every day that passes is one day closer to my possible death. I cannot enjoy this pregnancy because every movement of the baby reminds me that it could be the cause of my destruction." Pregnant women of the era developed what modern doctors would recognize as severe prenatal depression, anticipatory post-traumatic stress disorder, and debilitating chronic anxiety. Many considered suicide as a more humane alternative than facing the horrors of medieval childbirth. Records from the convent of St. Clare in Assisi show that a significant number of young women entered as novices specifically to avoid marriage and pregnancy. They preferred a life of religious celibacy to facing the brutal odds of medieval motherhood. Now, if you've made it this far and feel like you need to hug every obstetrician and gynecologist you know, definitely subscribe for more historical revelations that will make you value every aspect of modern medicine. But not all medieval women were passive victims of this terrifying medical system. Some developed secret networks of knowledge that directly challenged official medical practices, creating alternative methods of prenatal care that, while still primitive by modern standards, were significantly safer than official medicine. These networks were composed mainly of older women who had survived multiple pregnancies and had observed which treatments actually helped versus which ones killed patients. They operated in secret because challenging official medicine was considered heresy and could result in accusations of witchcraft. These medical witches, as they were disparagingly called by authorities, had discovered empirically that regular bloodletting dangerously weakened pregnant women, that mercury purgatives caused abortions, and that many of the official dietary restrictions were counterproductive. They developed alternative methods based on practical observation rather than male medical theory. They used herbs that actually had beneficial medicinal properties: raspberry leaf tea to strengthen the uterus, ginger for morning sickness, and chamomile for anxiety. They recommended diets rich in iron and protein instead of official food restrictions. They taught breathing techniques and birthing positions that facilitated the process instead of complicating it. Witchcraft trial records reveal that many of these women were executed specifically for interfering with legitimate medicine and leading women away from appropriate treatments. Their alternative methods were seen as direct challenges to male medical authority and divine will. But here's the devastating irony. Clandestine records kept by these networks show that women who received witch care had significantly higher survival rates than those who followed official medical protocols. Communities that protected these alternative healers had maternal mortality rates of 30–40%, compared to 60–70% in communities that relied exclusively on official doctors. In essence, the women who were labeled as dangerous witches by medieval society were actually the only people who were saving lives during pregnancy and childbirth. Their crime was being more effective than the male medical establishment. Records from Joan White's trial in England in 1576 show she was accused of witchcraft, specifically because women under her care had supernaturally high survival rates. Prosecutors argued that only demonic intervention could explain why her patients didn't die in expected proportions. This systematic persecution of the only people who truly understood effective prenatal care directly contributed to keeping maternal mortality rates high. Medieval society literally executed its best obstetric doctors because their competence threatened the authority of incompetent charlatans. And here we arrive at the most devastating reflection of this entire story. Medieval women didn't die during pregnancy due to inevitable technological limitations. They died due to a medical system that prioritized male authority and religious dogma over empirical observation and practical effectiveness. Many of the treatments that killed pregnant women weren't well-intentioned but misinformed attempts to help. They were ideological impositions designed to maintain control over female bodies and reinforce religious narratives about female suffering as divine punishment. The medieval medical system didn't fail to protect pregnant women by accident. It failed by design because a system that saw female suffering as morally necessary could never develop effective methods to alleviate it. Historical records show that when women had access to care developed by other women, based on practical experience, their outcomes improved dramatically. This demonstrates that knowledge for safer pregnancies existed, but was systematically suppressed by authorities who prioritized control over survival. So there you have it, the brutal reality of medieval pregnancy exposed. 9 months of medical terror disguised as healthcare, where seeking professional help tripled your chances of dying, where treatments were more dangerous than diseases, and where the only people who could really help you were executed as witches for being too effective. These weren't women who died due to inevitable technological limitations. They died due to a system that valued dogma over data, male authority over female experience, and ideological control over human survival. The next time you visit your gynecologist for a routine prenatal checkup, or the next time a friend complains about the inconveniences of modern pregnancy, remember that you're experiencing a miracle that millions of women throughout history would have considered impossible. A pregnancy where you're more likely to survive than die. Remember that every medical protection we take for granted during modern pregnancy, from prenatal vitamins to epidural anesthesia, was gained through centuries of struggle against systems that considered female suffering as natural and necessary. And remember that maintaining these medical advances requires constant vigilance, because history shows us that societies can backslide into medical barbarism with terrifying speed when we allow ideology to triumph over scientific evidence. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm going to appreciate the fact that I live in an era where pregnancy is monitored by trained professionals instead of tortured by ignorant charlatans. I'm going to value the miracle of modern obstetric medicine that transforms one of history's most dangerous processes into a generally safe and manageable experience. Because after diving into this historical nightmare of prenatal terror, I think we can all be deeply grateful to have been born in an era where giving birth means creating life, not risking death. And if you made it to the end of this revelation, as terrifying as it is necessary, about the reality of medieval pregnancy, tell us in the comments what country you're watching from. We're thrilled to know that these historical medical truths are reaching people around the world who value as much as we do the transformative power of real scientific progress.